When Barack Obama stood on stage delivering his remarks, many in the audience expected the same familiar rhythm. His carefully chosen words, his thoughtful pauses, and his occasional barbed remarks aimed at his political rivals. When the light, jab at Donald Trump came, most leaned forward in anticipation, waiting to see how Trump would handle it. After all, he had built a reputation for sharp retorts and a refusal to let anything slide without an answer. But in that moment, something unexpected happened. Trump didn't scowl, didn't frown, and didn't prepare a cutting comeback. Instead, he simply leaned back, cracked a smile, and let out a laugh that echoed across the hall. It wasn't the forced laugh of someone masking irritation. It was genuine, almost disarming in its ease. Those who knew Trump's public persona well understood how unusual this was. He was a man often painted by the media as combative, always ready for a verbal battle. His rallies were famous for their energy and his unscripted remarks, which sometimes bordered on confrontation. Yet here he was, being teased by Barack Obama, and rather than bristling, he laughed as though the joke had landed just right. For a second, even Obama seemed caught off guard. The former president paused ever so slightly as though registering that his longtime political adversary wasn't responding with anger but with amusement. The audience, too, hesitated, unsure if they should laugh along or wait for the other shoe to drop. What made this moment powerful wasn't just the laugh itself, but the ripple effect it caused. Trump's reaction broke the tension in the room. Instead of an escalation, the moment felt lighter. Those watching from home saw something rare. Two men who had been on opposite ends of some of the fiercest political battles in recent memory, sharing a moment that wasn't rooted in hostility. That laugh said more than words could. It was as if Trump was saying, "I can take it, and I'm not here to trade blows today." For Trump, laughter was a deliberate choice. He understood the cameras were fixed on him, waiting for a reaction that could easily dominate the headlines. A glare, a scoff, or a biting remark would have been easy to give and easier still for his critics to seize upon. Instead, the laugh flipped the narrative. Rather than looking thin-skinned, he appeared relaxed, almost playful, showing that he could handle Obama's ribbing without letting it shake him. In politics, where perception often matters as much as policy, that choice carried weight. Observers noted how different this reaction was compared to earlier encounters between the two. During Obama's presidency, Trump had been one of his most vocal critics, and the tension between them was no secret. Obama himself had once teased Trump at a White House correspondents' dinner, and Trump's stoic expression that night became part of political lore. But here, years later, the roles were reversed. Instead of holding a grudge, Trump chose to laugh, and in doing so, he rewrote the script. People in the crowd began to notice the subtle shift. Some laughed along, while others exchanged glances, as though trying to process what they were seeing. Could it be that Trump, often portrayed as brash and easily provoked, was showing a different side of himself? That simple laugh became more than a reaction. It became a statement. It suggested confidence, a willingness to rise above petty back and forth, and perhaps even a touch of humility. Across social media, clips of the moment spread rapidly. Supporters praised him for not taking the bait, for showing composure in a setting where many expected fireworks. Even some critics admitted that the reaction was surprising and, in its own way, refreshing. Instead of the endless cycle of jab and counter-jab, the American public saw a brief glimpse of levity between two figures often cast as irreconcilable rivals. The laugh, small as it may have seemed in the moment, reminded people that politics didn't always have to be a battlefield. Sometimes even the fiercest opponents could share a moment of humanity. When Donald Trump rose from his seat after Barack Obama had finished speaking, the audience collectively held its breath. Many assumed the moment of laughter would be followed by a trademark rebuttal, something sharp, something designed to shift the spotlight fully onto him. Instead, what unfolded was something far different. a shift in tone that caught even seasoned political observers off guard. Taking the microphone, he didn't launch into criticism, nor did he try to one-up Obama's remarks. He began with a simple acknowledgement, thanking Obama for his years of service and recognizing the role he had played in shaping the nation. It was not the voice of a man spoiling for a fight, but one who had decided, at least in that moment, to lean into respect and humor rather than hostility. The shift was striking. Here was Trump, a figure who had built his political identity on challenging the establishment and never backing down, choosing instead to soften the mood. He spoke in a conversational way, sprinkling his words with a few light-hearted jokes about his own unconventional style. He didn't pretend that he and Obama agreed on issues. They didn't, and he made that clear. But he framed those disagreements as part of what made the country unique. By highlighting the idea that America could hold two vastly different perspectives within its borders and still thrive, he steered the atmosphere away from confrontation and toward reflection. The audience, initially stiff with anticipation, began to respond. A few people chuckled at his self-deprecating humor. Some clapped politely, surprised by the turn the moment had taken. Even Obama, standing a few steps away, showed a small, almost reluctant grin. He had expected the familiar sparring, but what he received was something that momentarily bridged the wide gulf between them. That shift in tone made the entire room feel less like an arena for political combat and more like a shared stage where differing voices could coexist. Trump understood the symbolism of what he was doing. For years, the rivalry between him and Obama had been painted as one of the sharpest divides in modern politics. Each represented not only different policies, but different worldviews. By choosing to acknowledge Obama with a mix of respect and humor, Trump demonstrated that disagreement did not always have to translate into disdain. His tone was deliberate, firm enough to hold his identity, yet light enough to disarm the expected tension. What made the moment powerful was the contrast it created with the public's expectations. People were prepared for confrontation, for another clash that would dominate headlines and deepen the perception of division. Instead, they witnessed something more nuanced. Trump was still Trump, confident, bold, unfiltered. But in this setting, he let humor carry the weight of his message rather than sharp words. That tonal adjustment resonated beyond the room. Viewers at home saw a version of him that could surprise, a leader who knew when to hold back and when to inject levity. Even his critics, who often dismissed his style as combative, had to pause. Some commentators admitted that his remarks were not what they anticipated. By recognizing Obama, without descending into personal attacks, he flipped the script. The shift in tone created a temporary sense of unity, however fragile, and reminded people that politics wasn't destined to be an endless exchange of hostility. It showed that even figures as different as these two could occupy the same space, without tearing it apart. For supporters, this was a moment of pride. They saw in his words a confidence that didn't need to prove itself through confrontation. Laughter and acknowledgement, rather than criticism, became tools of strength. To them, it was proof that Trump could lead with humor and ease, qualities that didn't always shine through in the rough and tumble of politics. For others, the moment was a revelation, a reminder that beneath the sharp rhetoric was someone capable of breaking expectations in the most unexpected of ways. The air in the hall was different when he finished speaking. What had begun as a tense, almost predictable exchange turned into something that lingered in people's minds long after. The shift in tone, from rivalry to recognition, from sharp edges to humor, showed how powerful words could be when delivered with intention. Trump, by choosing that path, had altered not only the energy in the room, but also the way many Americans saw the relationship between two men who had often been defined by their opposition. Do you want me to move on and expand Keynote 3 in the same 700-word storytelling style? The surprise of the moment didn't end with Trump's laugh, or even with the respectful shift in tone that followed. What made the event echo across the country was the way people reacted afterward. The American public had grown accustomed to a script. Barack Obama would deliver a polished line, Trump would counter with a sharp remark, and the cycle of division would continue. This time, however, that script was broken. Viewers at home, commentators on television, and even some of the people in the audience admitted they had been caught completely off guard. Clips of Trump's reaction and his remarks spread across news outlets and social media within hours. On platforms where every gesture and word was analyzed, the footage of him laughing instead of scowling, joking instead of insulting, stood out. Some supporters celebrated the moment, praising him for showing composure and demonstrating that he didn't need to meet every jab with fire. They argued that the reaction revealed confidence, that only someone secure in their position could afford to laugh at criticism and follow it with humor. To them, it was proof of strength, a leader who didn't have to respond with anger to command attention. Even some critics, usually quick to find fault in everything he did, were taken aback. While they didn't suddenly agree with his policies, they noted how unusual the moment was. For once, the exchange between Trump and Obama wasn't defined by hostility but by a surprising civility. A few commentators even admitted that the moment felt refreshing, a brief pause from the relentless friction that often characterized American political life. The fact that they could acknowledge that shift, however briefly, showed the unexpected power of what had happened on that stage. What made it resonate even more deeply was the contrast it highlighted. For years, the image of the two men had been that of rivals locked in a battle that stretched far beyond policies. Obama had teased Trump in the past, most famously at the Correspondents' Dinner, when Trump's stoic reaction became a symbol of their divide. This new moment seemed to flip that history. Instead of appearing brooding or bitter, Trump seemed lighthearted, quick with a laugh, and even gracious when it came to recognizing Obama's service. That reversal stunned people who thought they had seen every side of him already. The surprise impact extended beyond politics. Ordinary people, watching from their living rooms, found themselves talking about it with family and friends. It wasn't just another argument in Washington, it was a moment of humanity, a reminder that even the fiercest of rivals could share a stage without turning it into a battlefield. That struck a chord because it stood in contrast to the constant division Americans saw on their screens. Some saw hope in that moment, believing that if Trump and Obama could coexist without hostility, perhaps ordinary citizens could as well. Of course, not everyone viewed it in the same way. There were those who argued it was just a calculated move, a performance designed to soften his image. But even if it was strategic, it still had an undeniable effect. Strategy or not, the choice to laugh instead of lash out created a memory that people kept replaying. It wasn't the expected Trump versus Obama clash that would fade into the long list of political squabbles. It was different, and that difference was exactly why it lingered. The media scrambled to interpret it. Some outlets framed it as a turning point, while others tried to downplay it as a fleeting moment. Yet the fact that so much attention was given to a single laugh and a respectful acknowledgement showed how starved people were for something unexpected, something outside the ordinary cycle of confrontation. Trump, in that instance, had given the country what it didn't know it wanted, a break from the predictability of division. In many ways, the stunned reaction of the public said as much about the state of America as it did about him. That a laugh and a kind word toward a rival could create such a stir revealed how rare civility had become in politics. People weren't used to it anymore, so when it happened, it felt almost groundbreaking. And that was the real surprise, not just what Trump did, but how deeply it resonated with a country The moment when Donald Trump chose to laugh at Barack Obama's remark and then follow it with respect and humor carried more than just surprise value. It spoke to something deeper, something Americans rarely see in the world of politics, the ability to embrace difference without letting it devolve into bitterness. For years, the country had grown used to seeing Trump and Obama as representatives of two opposing camps, almost symbolic of the divide that split the nation itself. Yet when Trump stood on that stage and reminded everyone that America could thrive precisely because of its competing visions, he was tapping into a lesson much bigger than the moment itself. What struck people most was the way he framed the rivalry. Trump didn't deny that he and Obama stood on opposite ends of the political spectrum. In fact, he acknowledged it outright. But instead of portraying it as a weakness, he presented it as a strength. He emphasized that the country was not designed to have one voice or one path, but to hold many voices together, even when they conflicted. That message, delivered by someone known for his brashness, carried a weight that surprised both supporters and critics. By leaning into the idea that disagreement could coexist with respect, he was showing that America's foundation rested on the ability to argue fiercely, yet remain united in identity. The bigger lesson wasn't hidden. It was in plain sight. Trump was reminding people that unity doesn't mean uniformity. For a long time, politics had been cast as a zero-sum game. One side wins, the other side loses, and the cycle continues. By laughing instead of bristling, by speaking with humor instead of hostility, he showed that acknowledging an opponent didn't mean surrendering principles. It meant recognizing that the strength of the nation came from the freedom to disagree openly. This was a perspective that struck a chord with those who were tired of endless shouting matches and yearned for a reminder that differences didn't always have to spiral into hatred. The response from the audience in that hall captured the significance of the lesson. At first hesitant, they began to applaud, some slowly, some more enthusiastically, as if realizing the weight of what they were witnessing. Even Obama, who had often been at odds with him, gave a nod that suggested respect for the gesture. For a moment, the rivalry seemed to transform into something less personal and more symbolic. Two men standing for very different ideas, but both recognizing they belonged to the same national story. For Americans watching from home, the lesson resonated in conversations that spilled beyond politics. Families talked about it at dinner tables, colleagues mentioned it at work, and commentators analyzed it on television. Many were struck not just by what Trump said, but by what it represented. That two individuals with vastly different views could share a stage without turning it into a battlefield. The fact that this felt extraordinary revealed how much division had become the norm. People were stunned not just by Trump's actions, but by what those actions revealed about the state of the country. Critics who tried to downplay the moment still found themselves acknowledging the lesson it carried. Some argued it was merely a performance or a calculated move, but even then, they had to admit that the message was valuable. Whether strategic or genuine, the result was the same. It reminded people that democracy is built on debate, not destruction. Trump, by shifting the tone, had highlighted that reality in a way that cut through the noise. The lesson extended beyond the political class. Ordinary Americans, many of whom had grown weary of the constant fighting between parties, saw in the moment a glimpse of what was possible if leaders chose civility over hostility. It didn't erase the disagreements, and it didn't solve the nation's challenges, but it offered a small but powerful reminder that differences could exist without tearing the fabric of the country apart. Trump's choice to laugh and to speak with respect, rather than escalate, underscored that truth in a way that left people thinking long after the event had ended. In the end, what stunned America wasn't just the unexpected behavior itself, but the larger lesson it carried. It was a reminder that strength in leadership isn't always about forceful words or quick comebacks. It can also be found in restraint, in humor, and in the willingness to acknowledge an opponent's place in the shared story of the nation. That moment, brief as it was, reminded Americans of something they had almost forgotten, that their country was built to withstand division and, in fact, to be stronger because of it. As the dust settled on that unforgettable moment, Americans were left with something far more meaningful than a soundbite or a headline. What began with Barack Obama delivering his trademark wit and Donald Trump laughing in response turned into a scene that carried lessons for the entire nation. The sight of two men who had often been portrayed as bitter rivals sharing the same stage in a moment that was neither hostile nor combative reminded people of something they had been yearning for: perspective. Trump's decision to laugh instead of lash out spoke volumes. It showed that strength doesn't always have to be loud or aggressive. Sometimes true confidence is found in the ability to take a jab, smile at it, and move forward without bitterness. That small action redefined how many people saw him in that instant. It painted a picture of someone who could rise above provocation and lean into levity, surprising even those who thought they knew his every move. Then came the shift in tone. A choice to step into respect and humor instead of continuing a battle of words. That choice created a ripple effect, softening the atmosphere not only in the room, but across living rooms and news studios around the country. By recognizing Obama's years of service while maintaining his own distinct identity, Trump showed that disagreement didn't have to mean disrespect. That message stood out because it felt rare in a climate where opponents were often painted as enemies. The reaction that followed confirmed just how unusual it was. Supporters celebrated it as proof of composure and strength. Critics, though hesitant, admitted that it was unexpected and even refreshing. The fact that so many people were stunned revealed just how accustomed America had become to constant division. The moment stood out precisely because it broke that cycle, however briefly, and reminded the country that civility could exist even in the sharpest of rivalries. And then came the larger lesson, the reminder that unity is not about uniformity, but about coexistence. Trump framed the differences between himself and Obama as a strength of the American system, not a weakness. That message resonated deeply because it touched on a truth embedded in the very fabric of the nation. America was built to thrive on debate, to hold competing visions under one flag, and to find strength in its diversity of thought. By embodying that idea in his reaction and words, Trump reminded people of something they had nearly forgotten. That disagreement doesn't have to destroy unity. In the end, what stunned America wasn't just that Trump laughed or that he spoke with humor and respect. What truly stunned the nation was the realization of what that moment symbolized. It was a glimpse of what politics could look like when leaders chose, not to escalate, but to elevate. It didn't erase years of rivalry, and it didn't mean future clashes wouldn't come, but it offered hope. Hope that even in an era of division, moments of grace were still possible. And for many Americans, that hope was the most powerful takeaway of all.